Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and today I'm really excited to have my really good friend, Doc Kennedy here. Doc, how are you doing today?
Great, Andy. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. What do you have exciting going on you want to tell people about right now?
Well, the greatest thing on the planet, Andy. Only just the greatest thing on the planet, which I was made aware that you're not even in tune with because you were shocked that I was sporting Doc Kennedy Live, my podcast. It's my baby. Well, yeah. And my baby. I have two babies. So
you got a real baby and then your other baby.
Yeah. And my wife would say, babe type thing. So probably
yeah, you've got a lot of affection going on in your life. That's exciting.
There's a lot of love flowing through here.
So where can people find your show?
DocKennedyLive.com.
Nice and easy. DocKennedyLive.com. And you'll hear a little bit probably coming up here about what kind of stuff you can hear on Doc's show. Yeah. So Doc and I know each other from being in the comedy scene here in the Northwest, which was a great time back when we could do live comedy. And then and Doc said, I'm done with Washington and moved across country to further life. So
yes.
So Doc, what's your awkward thing you've had to own in order to get to where you are today?
Well, this is where half your viewers just click out, but I want to encourage you before I say this, hang in there because I think it's important that we have dialogue, that we have conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And my awkward was admitting I was a Trump supporter.
Oh, are
and
people
this
still listening?
I do. In 2016. This goes back.
Okay.
That first election, I'm in the comedy scene with you, and I did everything I could to just kind of not make any of my intentions known. I didn't feel the need.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think that it would be a huge deal, regardless.
Sure.
But so the election happens, Trump's in. I made a simple comment on Facebook, just supporting
mm-hmm.
an action that he took. And some folks in the local comedy scene didn't take kindly to it. And they there was people trying to get me kicked off shows and calling me Nazi and all this stuff that really, it hurt me to the point that I got physically sick.
Wow.
And that's no fun. I didn't feel like I earned that, obviously.
Right. Well, when you're talking about getting basically blacklisted from shows for having a viewpoint, was that, how aggressive were you getting with people? Were you in their face? Were you being violent in places where people could, because it seems like to be to that level, you must have done something where you took an action that said Doc is dangerous.
Well, at this time, 2016, there was this huge push to say that Trump supporters were Nazis.
Mm.
That was kind of the lingo going around.
Right.
In hindsight, if someone is fearful, if someone really believes that someone could go to that level,
mm-hmm.
I don't blame them because in my mind, they were lied to and they believed it.
I see.
They just saw me as a threat. It didn't matter if my intentions were good or not. They weren't going to see it. I was just evil, period.
So if someone sees you from that viewpoint, how possible is it to have a dialogue about the differences you have in opinion?
Yeah, it's impossible because they've already made up their mind that they have, and we're seeing that now. They've already made up their mind. So this I've really enjoyed sporting the hat.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Nashville. I'm in the city. I've always had a piece of country in me because I was born in Montana, and that's always been a kind of a part of my roots.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not like some hillbilly up the street. So I put the hat on recently. I used to have it just sitting right in the backdrop, and
Okay.
people on the show said, "Hey, why don't you put the hat on?" So, okay, no problem.
It's a good look. You're sporting it.
Thanks. Yeah, and I enjoy it. Well, the comments that I've been getting, Andy, they have gone from like all I hear is every slang that you would hear about some Southern hick, and so it's all based off.
Just because you're wearing the hat.
Yeah, that's all it took to say, hey, this guy's an ignorant fool.
Wow, that really does show how much we tend to relate image to our opinions and our values.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you first, I like to get in and really take apart people owning their awkward and kind of understand. So when you first put that out there, were you shocked or were you surprised by the level of rejection you had?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It shocked and it really hurt me. When I talked about getting sick, I developed vertigo through it.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a really rotten time and a really, really hurtful thing that I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't care about my feelings,
right?
But what was going on in me, because it was a character attack. I'm not racist.
Mm-hmm.
I love people straight up.
Well, and
so that label, and I'm a history junkie, so I know exactly who the Nazis were. I'll tell you what, Andy, there's a lot of people now, they throw that term around. They have no clue what the actual history of Nazi Germany is.
Well, and how did that, because when you look at the political scene right now, and we're at the end of 2020 coming up to a new year, there's been a lot of dialogue, a lot of slurs thrown back and forth in different directions. In 2016, it's hard to believe that it could have been a big shock because of what we've been living through the last 4 years. But back then was more the beginning of the situation. So
the reason that I tried to hide it was twofold. Number one, I didn't want my car being vandalized. And I was seeing that happen, of course. And then, of course, I didn't want my comedy career being impacted negatively. But that's what happened, And so we talk about owning our awkward. You fast forward to 2019, I just took it straight up. I knew what was coming, and I'm just going to ride it out. And I've had a similar experience in the Nashville comedy scene. And I mean, we haven't been doing hardly any shows anyway. So that's been that. But
well, and politics are tricky because when you claim a side and you have to really decide based on your personality and your business, if you want to involve that in it or not. And if you claim a side, then you now have the situation where you could potentially be alienating half of your audience or more, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
But on the flip side,
drawing in audience.
Exactly. Yeah. Have you found that your audience has grown because of the stand that you've taken?
Yeah. Yeah, I have. And it's gone different. During this season, 2020, I haven't really been doing comedy. I've taken on what I see as a war for the Republic and just running with it, because in my point of view, and you don't have to agree with me, nobody does, but my point of view, we're not going to have a stage to perform on if we lose our freedom of speech.
Right. Yeah. And that's scary to me when I see the opportunity for censorship that's out there.
Yeah.
Because
I've censored so hard on YouTube, and it's been so frustrating because my channel should be in the thousands of subscribers, And I'm not being or anything. That's just how it should be right now. And it's in the hundreds, and it's plateaued. And I know that's not right, because I keep cranking out stuff that when it's shared directly, if someone shares it to a person directly, they love it. But actually finding it in a search has become extremely difficult. And so the censorship, and why I say it's a war, is because the left is the one controlling who gets to be heard and who doesn't. And say what you will about Trump. I mean, if he's a dictator, I mean, he really sucks at it, because he is pro First Amendment and pro Second Amendment, which,
and that can be kind of the irony in the dialogue. And when you look at things that are censored, it is scary. No matter which, neither side should have so much control that nothing is being discussed.
Yeah, the role of government should always be enforce the Constitution, protect the citizens, and stay out of the way. That's all anyone should want. It's not having food lines and having people backed up down the block be fed. That's a dictatorship. That is communism, and that's not what I'm signed up for. That's for sure.
Right.
And so why I'm all in. Like, I'm not hiding anything.
Well, and that's the thing. You're definitely owning your awkward in that regard, and that's your show actually discusses these issues.
Yeah,
and that's
it's God, family, country, and I know there's a lot of people that can't believe that you could be a Trump supporter and a Christian, but that's my boat, and I'm very big on hearing from God and prophecy. And so we talk a lot about that too. What is God saying about what's going on in America right now? And really trying to bridge gaps, because it's not my desire to be at war with people. It's actually my desire to build bridges and see healing in our land. But sometimes it takes a fight to get to a point where people would be willing to listen. We're going to go wherever is necessary, but we prefer peace for sure.
Well, and that's when you look at what you're doing with your conversation and you're trying to fill that gap. Are there tactics you have found that seem to work better with having a conversation, or with bringing people into that middle space where ideas can be shared?
Yeah, you'd be amazed at how many people just don't know the truth. If people are willing to listen, that's the biggest key. And that has to be on the individual. Are they willing to have a conversation? Are they willing to listen? And are they willing to adjust their opinion according to the facts?
Yeah. And I think, like, when you bring up people being able to see the truth or understand it, there's that documentary on Netflix with, I think it's A Social Experiment, where they actually break down how some of those algorithms work. And it really highlights that even beyond the censorship that's out there, the selective sharing of what gets put in front of your feed.
Yep.
I mean, that prohibits people from seeing the truth from either side. And so then here we are both, you're both walking into a negotiation or a conversation without even the perspective that you should have of what's possible from the other side that could be positive.
Yeah. Well, take Nashville, for instance, when it comes to social media, YouTube. We just had the biggest event happen on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
There was a bombing downtown. I should, because I've been talking about this, my channel should be clicking. It should be rolling. And it is at a trickle. It's not right, Andy. And this is part of the war. It's a war for freedom of speech. I don't care if your opinion doesn't align with mine. It's only fair that we both get the same opportunity to share our thoughts. And this whole idea that words are violence, that's straight out of Karl Marx type thinking.
Well, and
It's made to try to silence truth.
And when you talk about that, because there definitely is an idea that, we don't want to be preaching violence necessarily. We don't want to be encouraging people to be violent.
For sure.
But what is the difference between where you're saying that words aren't violent, where that's okay?
Well, I'll tell you what, Andy, when I see Antifa allowed to put together their riots through Twitter, they use Twitter to actually tell people where to go.
Right. Yeah.
Facebook does too. They allow them to do that. That to me is violence. When you're destroying a city, you're actively burning down businesses that are not yours. You're burning down property that is not yours. That's violence. And versus saying, and I understand right now that there's some folks on the right who are getting a little, they're pushing it, and I'm not supporting that one bit.
Right.
If it comes down to a straight up fight, we'll have that when it's time. But just going out and starting chaos, that's not what I'm about. And I do believe that type of stuff, Twitter, they and Facebook, they need to be held accountable, because they have. If I'm one of those business owners, I'm suing the crap out of guys, because they helped make it possible. It wasn't, 20 years ago, it would be really hard to get everybody together at the same time.
Sure.
But now they're able to
plan ahead by quite a ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, and how do you then draw the line on what should and shouldn't be censored? Because clearly, if those tweets are going out, it's all theoretically opinion as far as what is and is not valid.
Yeah. So that's okay. But the president saying the election was rigged is not okay. That's right. Insanity. You're telling certain people that it's okay to get together and burn down a city. But meanwhile, one person is not allowed to say, hey, I think there was some irregularities here. Well, that's the type of global overreach that I see.
Well, that's always my fear when we get into situations like this, is that who is the person who gets to decide what gets to go out? Yeah. And do I put all of my faith in that person's trust? Yeah. And is that an administrator at Twitter or?
Well, and even as I just said, what I just said, in my mind, going, oh crap, I shouldn't have said that, because they're picking through what's being said here to decide if this should get a bigger reach.
There goes my podcast views right now. Thanks a lot, Doc.
Yeah.
No, but it is an important discussion, because people, I think the motive behind censoring things, when you believe that your viewpoint is right and you believe that the other side is damaging and harmful, I think that where that base idea of putting it in place comes from is, for the most part, with a lot of people, from a good value. They're trying to be protective of the world.
Yeah. Well, and I think also that there's a real knowledge from the higher ups that people do actually learn through posts. There's this idea going around that nobody's ever changed through a Facebook post. That's not true. That's absolutely true. Because when the truth is presented, people are wise, for the most part, and they can decipher what's true and what's not. And if they decide to dig, they can. Yeah.
So you have obviously shifted from being not at all out there with how you feel to putting a show on about it and talking about it very openly. Yeah. How difficult was it to make that transition? What did you run into as far as your own inner feelings to make that happen? Was it I'm all in, or did you kind of take your time to step into it?
Yeah, because 2016, I saw what would happen if I stayed quiet. What was the result of that?
Sure.
It was horrible. So I'm like, well, screw that. I'm in. It didn't take anything. And yeah, like I said, there's a lot of folks in the local comedy scene, which I love the Nashville comedy scene. And I'll get to go back, and we'll be back out, and it won't be a big deal. But right now, as temperature is high, it is kind of, and there's one or two that are tied in with Antifa and all that. So, I just kind of protect myself a little bit, but
what
hasn't been difficult at all. It's just been a desire to see greatness in this land. And I know that people don't agree with how I'm viewing that, but I'm not intimidated by them not agreeing. And I'm not intimidated by them trying to shut me up. I do what I can, and if that means I have to open 5 YouTube channels to try to push that out, then so be it.
I guess do you picture a world where there's no left, or there's no, like, what is the end goal? Is it conversation? Is it one viewpoint? How do we get to that place?
Well, the first thing is getting through this season, and then it is conversation. And I do believe that there's a large number of people. I don't believe that the results of things, I'll put it that way. The results of things are what we have been led to believe by the mainstream media. There was this huge shift in minorities voting on the right. And you don't even have to look at the presidential race to see that. They were actually voting in their state and locals towards the right. So, there was a big loss from the left. People are a lot more, they're waking up to reality, and that's one of the favors that Twitter and Facebook actually did for us in allowing Antifa to gather and show their true colors, because Antifa is nothing more than a tool from the left. And not every left, there's good Democrats still. There's good Democrats.
Well, I think that's one thing that, regardless of which side you're on, when it comes to campaigning, there becomes a kind of a poster child for each side.
Sure.
And that becomes hard if you don't line up with those values. But you may, here's center, and you might be kind of in the middle of center.
Sure.
And not on the far right or left. And we're kind of put in a situation where it's so polarized that you have to go all the way one way or the other.
Yeah, which is exactly what Biden had to do.
Yeah, which unfortunately that kills the conversation.
Yeah. But that's where we are, and I'm owning that too. That I'm not trying to pretend that we're not in that place. That's exactly where we are. I live in a part of the country where we had, in 1864, Battle of Nashville, and the Battle of Franklin, and in I believe it was 1862, the Stones River, which was a massive battle where over 10,000 people were killed. And so I look around just my region, and I see what civil war actually looks like. I see what the cost is, and I'm definitely. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and I'm definitely in the peacemaker side of things. I don't want to fight. I don't think a lot of people want to fight. Some do, some do, and I don't know that you can really. That's a hard one to change too. That's a hard, because it's extreme on that side.
Right. So how do you step into it from a place of finding peace and conversation when you're stepping into that conversation?
Again, well, it starts with someone willing to listen. Do you even want to have the conversation? Because if you don't waste my time. You might as well talk to the wall, because I've tried to have those conversations, and they're not worth it. If someone's not willing to just hear, which a lot of times they're not right now, if they're not even willing to hear someone else's side, then don't waste your time.
Yeah, a lot of times I
At all.
look at politics like we're taking a trip to Disneyland from Seattle to LA, or to,
Yeah.
from here to there, and there's 10 different ways you can get there, and we're all kind of aiming towards that same finish line where we want to have that happy place. We want people to be taken care of. We want society to be living well. We want, it's a small world all day long, even though that song's going to get stuck in your head. However, we're having this argument about whether or not we should go down Highway 101 and enjoy the coast along the way, or take I-5 and do a straight shot, or take a side trip through Vegas on the way there, or just hop on a plane. And everybody is so determined that if we don't take our route, we will never get to Disneyland. And yet they all kind of end in the same destination at some point. So how do we kind of have that conversation along the way? And I guess what I'm getting to is finding that middle ground. And when we're starting a conversation with people, how do we find what are we united on? What do we have common agreement in? And then branch out from there, instead of starting with the conversation on the outside.
Yeah. Well, like I said with the hat, why are you assuming that I be a certain stereotype that you've decided exists by one piece, one hat? This I've come to learn is no different than a mega hat, and people are just ignorant in that.
Yeah, it's too bad. I hate to say it, we are getting down to the last couple of minutes here. So what's a tip you'd leave our viewers with and our listeners to for how they can own their awkward?
Well, if you're still with us, it's because you actually, you're not intimidated by a conversation. You're not intimidated by different thoughts, different points of view. So be open with people. Just be honest. We don't have enough honest people right now. We have a lot of flaky people that are trying to protect themselves and trying to just not get their feelings hurt and all this other stuff. Think long term. Just think long term. Andy, your analogy was good, but I do believe that there's some people who intend for us to break down in Death Valley and leave.
But never get there.
Yeah, and kill us in the process. Kill us off. There is a global desire to see the Republic, the United States of America, destroyed. So think long term. What is worth it? What is not? And when you're talking to your great grandkids, what will you be telling them? The stories of 2020. Will they be that I stood up and fought for what was right? Or will it be that I didn't take it serious?
Wow. All right. Well, yeah, you got to think about what that legacy is we're going to leave. So really appreciate that, Doc. I appreciate you opening up, owning your awkward. That's not always easy to do.
Well, some easier than others.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Doc. And be sure to check out Doc Kennedy Live for more of Doc's message and story. And thank you again for tuning in. And don't forget to own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.